Welcome to the Subscription Maker Podcast. This is your host, Zachary Alexander, Enterprise Architect at subscriptionmaker.net. Please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast so that you won't miss any new episodes. Today, we are talking with Jennifer Eggers. Jennifer is a consultant, coach, best-selling author, and world-class speaker. Jennifer is the owner of Leadership Insights, a firm that helps leaders deal with disruptive change. The reason we are talking with Jennifer is because she is an expert in resilience. For me, that means finding a way to weather a storm. It means digging deep to find the right stuff to continue on in the face of unfavorable odds. Jennifer, welcome to the Subscription Maker Podcast.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here. I appreciate it.
I got to start by asking you, what was it like to be a competitive water skier?
Oh gosh, it's funny. I was not athletic as a kid, so water skiing kind of came up later in life for me. So for that reason, I wasn't nearly as competitive as I would have liked to be, but there's no place on earth I would rather be than behind the boat. And so for about 10 years, I made a lot of sacrifices to do that. So it was a blast.
Was it everything you thought it would be?
I think we all have expectations of what competing at that level really in any sport is like. And it never really is when you get there. So water skiing is no different. It's certainly not glamorous. It's more probably political at that point. But I will tell you that I was also a driver and a judge, and being female and being a driver in the sport was the hardest battle that I've really fought in my life. But I think every minute of it was worth it, but it certainly wasn't what I expected.
So I got to ask, how did you get MBA work with a major consultancy without an MBA?
You're asking all the good questions today. So, I think that's an interesting one. I was hired at Arthur Andersen as the only undergraduate that they had ever brought into their consulting practice. And the irony of it was that I didn't have an MBA, so I didn't even qualify for the training that they put new people through when you join the company. And so they had no idea what to do with me. So they put me, out in the field as a consultant with the rest of the new MBAs that had just gone through training, and just expected me to, sink or swim. And I don't know, why that was, but it worked. And what I learned very early was that I was going into these situations with really senior level clients, and I knew nothing about their business, and I knew nothing about, what I was even supposed to be doing there. And so I got really scrappy in terms of how to get things done. And I got really good at finding the clients that knew the answers. And what I learned, and this has really shaped my whole career, is that your clients know their business better than you ever will. So as a consultant, when you come in and you act like you know everything and you're pulling all your best practices off the shelf, they may or may not be relevant. But there's probably some really good senior people and with a lot of knowledge and experience in these companies that know how to fix whatever they need fixed. They're just not empowered to do so. And so I got really good at getting the right team, getting the right clients, tapping the right people, and then facilitating them to build recommendations that worked. And so the best thing about that was about 4 years later, Arthur Andersen did a study, and they looked at many projects and said, well, which are the recommendations that were still standing 3 to 5 years later? And to a project, the recommendations that my teams put in place were some of the only ones that were actually still in existence at most of the clients they had at the time. And so that really shaped my business and how I operate in terms of we pride ourselves on not doing things to clients, but with them. And I will never claim to know more than they do about their business. But what I do claim to know is a really good process and a methodology to get them to the answer. And that's really what we're known for at LeaderShift.
So are you planning to go back to get your MBA?
It's a little late now. I think it's been so many years. I just don't know that it would be cost effective. There are probably other, and I'm pretty active with the Adaptive Leadership Network at Harvard, and I've gotten involved in some other sort of scholarly endeavors that I really enjoy. They probably won't be an MBA, but I certainly, have a belief that you never stop learning, and I try to surround myself with people that, can point me in different directions and continue to challenge me. But as for going back and getting an MBA, probably not.
From where I sit, I would say, why mess with perfection? If it's working, roll with it.
No, I don't know if we're perfect, but I won't mess with success, though. I'll tell you that.
Have you ever had to pivot your company or your career?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest pivot was probably started in my water ski, if you call it a career. And it was interesting. I mean, after rehabbing two major accidents and then being diagnosed with a rare blood disorder, and discovering that I would never ski again, that was a pretty big pivot. And so at that time, kind of during that pivot, I lost patience with a lot of things because the things that seemed important before really weren't important going forward. And so I think sort of facing the reality of just the fragility of life and that kind of thing, I lost patience with a lot of things that just didn't make sense. And so at the time, I had run learning and organization development for Bank of America and AutoZone, ran executive development and process improvement for AutoZone. Worked with, by then, lots of companies in my consulting practice. And I felt like companies were spending millions of dollars on things that were making the business worse instead of driving ROI. And so the two things that were really the most critical to me were leadership development and restructuring. So organizations were, I think in my last 8 months at Bank of America, we restructured 5 times. And it just creates churn and pain for the people in the business, but it really wasn't doing anything productive. And so I wanted to find a way to do both of those things in a way that added value. And so that's when I started LeaderShift Insights, really to focus on leadership development that drives ROI and restructuring that actually is sustainable, doesn't have to be done over and over again, and really links the structure to the business strategy.
How did that process work for you, the pivot process?
Wow. I was very planful about it. And I think, to me, I found a new purpose for my life and my work. And I really went headlong into focusing on that, which in a lot of ways took my mind off of, some of the things I couldn't do health-wise at the time. But it was a very planful process. It was interesting. I was in a corporate situation that was kind of heading south, and I wasn't real happy with. We had a CEO change, and I wasn't really happy with my boss. And um, but when I decided to do it, I took a week off in March of 2007, and I started the business, and I built the plan, and I really did a thorough business plan. I hired someone to help me, and then I waited. I sat on it until the right time. And what I wanted to do is do it on my terms, not run away. So I feel like what I did a good job of was walking towards what I really wanted, not so much running away. So when, in early October, it started to become clear that I really wanted to get out of corporate America, and frankly, out of AutoZone at the time. And that's a great company, don't get me wrong there, but the situation at the time was not going where I wanted it to go. So I had everything ready and all the plans were in place. So when it was time to go, I literally walked back to my office from resigning to a phone call, and my phone was ringing. It was a partner in a company that I had hired, one of the two organizations that actually did leadership development that drove ROI, and they asked me to take their US business for a year. So I stepped out of corporate America into, what was pretty well thought out business.
That sounds like great planning. So, who did you turn to for help? What kind of people, kind of professionals did you bring in?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I hired a woman who, was brilliant at the time at starting up new businesses. And so she disappeared on me about a month into our consulting work. So I didn't have much help when the rubber met the road. I remember the one thing she said when I built the business plan, she gave me the Business Planning for Dummies book, which, in retrospect, I probably could have found myself without too much work, but she recommended it. So that was how I wrote my plan. But I didn't have much help in terms of the guidance and the wisdom that I had hoped for. So I think most of the people around me really thought I was crazy. But I was very planful and tried to be as thoughtful as I could. I mean, you certainly never anticipate everything. But, and I would also say the managing partner at Cambridge Leadership Group, they were sort of my first instant client. And he was just great. Al Preble, he was just great at making me better at what I did from a facilitation and consulting standpoint.
Tell us a little bit about Leadership Insights.
Um, so Leadership Insights is focused on, we work with leaders and organizations going through disruption to improve their capacity to adapt. So we've had we've had some iterations of what this was over the years. I mean, I think when we launched at first, we said we're an org design firm, and then we sort of offered in secret leadership development. But what I've learned is you really can't separate a lot of those things. So today we facilitate really thought-provoking sessions with senior leadership teams. We do a lot of executive coaching. We have a very fast and collaborative restructuring process. We call it Rapid OD, and it's really the only one of its kind. And our leadership workshops, as you might expect, are the 3 that I found that actually drive ROI. So after looking at hundreds of these, I bought the rights to one, became a partner with Cambridge, helped them scale that one, and then wrote the 3rd.
So why resilience?
And I think one of the other major lessons just over, 20 years of working with thousands of companies going through disruption, in over half the 50 states and 11 countries, I will say, I believe that resilience is the single most critical skill that leaders need today. And very few people are talking about it, and almost no one is building it. So, people throw that word around, but I don't hear a lot about it's a skill that leaders need that you can actually build. I mean, it's even as late as, we're in the middle of COVID, and even as late as last week, I read an article about, the top 10 things leaders need. Resilience is nowhere on the list. It doesn't even make the conversation, but I believe it's a skill that can be built. And I think it's the absolute number one thing that will make or break a leader today.
How do you define resilience?
I think it's resilience is about being energized and elevated by disruption. So you can emerge stronger and more effective faster. And so my book that came out last summer is Resilience. It's not about bouncing back. And if you ask most people, when you ask, what is resilience, you go, oh, we're going to bounce back. Well, this situation that we're in is the perfect case for there is no back. You can't bounce back from a tough situation. Many times with the rapid pace of change and the way disruption hits us, there's no back to bounce to. So we have to figure out how to be energized and elevated by that disruption and use it as lift so that we can emerge stronger, more effective, faster. So that's our definition.
What kind of services do you offer?
We do, as I said, we do a ton of executive coaching. We do a lot of facilitating of complex meetings with complex stakeholders. We do board retreats. We do senior level meetings. We offer 3 workshops, the LeaderShift Mastery Series, which we believe is sort of the 80 to 90% solution around executive development. And so those are resilience. There's a 2-day resilience program. There's an influence program and a driving sustainable change program. We can do HR consulting, and we certainly have done a lot of that because it's certainly in our wheelhouse. But lately, we've been focused more on sort of leadership cohorts and how do we really develop people around those core concepts.
Do you offer?
I'll just add, those core concepts are really, the linking factor there is adaptive leadership. So it's how do we really help leaders and organizations adapt in the face of disruption and frankly, improve their capacity to adapt.
Do you offer any subscription services?
Well, our coaching program is a 6-month program. We don't do short-term, coaching like that. The cohort programs tend to be longer-term programs. You can certainly subscribe to our blog at no charge. And I think at some point we're considering rolling out a paid subscription service. I think that'll likely be for people who have completed our workshops or our coaching program to kind of, sustain that and maybe provide some group coaching and some additional content. But quite frankly, I mean, I'm excited about hearing what you have, with your podcast, and I've enjoyed listening to your the experts that I've joined because I think that's something we can learn from and probably needs to be on our list.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball. How do you compete with large multinational companies?
It's interesting. We had a client not long ago say to me, well, what's the difference between you and McKinsey? And I have to laugh because my answer was something like, you mean besides the obvious? I mean, we're pretty small and nimble. So we have about 15 people that work on my team. And so we're very different. I would say but if I could stop laughing about that, I would say that I think the biggest thing is that because we're small and nimble, our goal is not to take up space in your conference room, wander your hall selling work, and talk to your boss about you. Our goal is to get in, have a win, and get out. And we don't really want to spend our lives working with the same client. Obviously, if there's more that we can do with you, we'll work with you as long as we can. But I want to equip you so that we don't have to do the same thing twice. And so I think the large consulting firms are famous for putting, a conference room full of 12 junior people, and they tend to go do the work and then come back with a binder. Our process is more of, I want your leaders in a room and we're going to build it together. And I don't really care what the binder looks like. What I care about is, do we have alignment around a plan to execute what we're trying to deliver? And I can do that a lot faster. I can do it a lot cheaper, and I can do it a lot better than the big consulting firms. So you save money and you're going to get a better product that's a whole lot more implementable. So I'll stand by that every day.
If I remember correctly, you started this chapter of your life with a speech. Is that correct?
I did. I've always been a speaker. So, I taught for Dale Carnegie when I was 16. But this chapter of my life, and I think when you say this chapter, you're probably referring to the resilience chapter, which is when I really started the book and things like that. I pitched an idea for a talk that I hadn't even written to a conference promoter who called and said, I sent him a list of 10 ideas, and he called me back and he said, I can't decide. I really want you to do 2. And ironically, they were the 2 that I hadn't written. So like a crazy person, I agreed to do it. And so one of them was the resilience talk, which I wrote over a weekend before the appointed conference. I gave the talk, 200 people gave me a standing ovation, and they rushed the stage. So that has never happened before or since in my life as a speaker. But, in that moment, with the next speaker waiting and not being able to get on the stage, I was standing there, and I decided I didn't matter if I had to live in a mud hut, that I would do this for the rest of my life. And so that speech became a life-changing corporate workshop, the resilience program, and then it became the book as well. And so really proud of that. I mean, it was just this crazy moment that I realized there's a lot of power in this. And so I'm incredibly proud of, we put a corporate team through that program not long ago. And the last half a day is really focused on building a resilience framework for the organization. So part of it is about individual, and then we focus on the company. And so I called him 3 weeks later and said, tell me what's changed. I mean, we had all these major breakthroughs, lots of impact in the class, but what's changed in reality? Because that's really the only thing that matters. And he said, Jennifer, 12 people went through your program, and our entire company is more courageous because of it. And it was such a profound moment. And again, it goes back to my live in a mud hut strategy, as long as I can get to continue, being blessed to do this work.
Are you a member of the National Speakers Association?
Oh, I am. And I would just say that that's probably the single most value-added professional organization in existence. I've been a member of hundreds of those. And, like nobody's perfect and no organization is perfect. But honestly, that organization has really blessed me with an awful lot of great connections and a lot of just knowledge and massive lessons learned from NSA.
What would you tell someone who was starting out and wanted to become a speaker, wanted to use that to build their community, build their presence online?
Oh man, join NSA, first of all, and hang around in their chapters and their Facebook groups. I mean, if you can go to their conferences, so much the better. Their conferences are incredible. But between the conferences, the chapters, and the Facebook groups, every resource that you could possibly need to build a speaking business is there. And all and if you don't see it, all you have to do is ask, and somebody will jump to your rescue. I mean, I put in a CRM last year, and I put one question out in an NSA group, and I had 4 people volunteer to demo their CRMs with me. And one of them, Teresa Friend, she's just incredible sales consultant, called. She actually works for me now, but she called out of the blue and was willing to look through my whole process and help me choose a CRM. And she knew everyone that was out there. She picked the absolute right one for me. She did it all free, no expectation of business. And of course I hired her the minute I could, because it was just such a great experience. But that's the kind of people, those are the kinds of things you find in NSA.
So if the last one was a curveball, this time I'm going to throw you a changeup.
Okay.
What do you think about online communities?
Oh, I think the online communities have been invaluable to me. I mean, not just from a sales standpoint, but from a resource, support, and learning standpoint. I tend to join the communities where people are willing to help, and I can crowdsource a solution. In fact, here's a great example, and this wasn't even me asking, but somebody put a question in one of the online communities I'm in, and they said, they were trying to come up with a list of questions to ask clients that where you're going to do a virtual speaking event. So, all of us speakers have a list of things that we go through a questionnaire with our prospective clients, or maybe not even prospective, but when you're ready to speak. She wanted to customize it for virtual. So she put it on this online thing, and within 20 minutes, there were probably 10 questions that I would have never thought of, which I will add to my questionnaire. And so I just got that. I didn't even realize I needed it, but there it was. So I think there's tremendous value in online communities, and I'm looking forward to starting one.
So would you ever think about starting your own private network?
Yeah, I don't have plans to do that right now, but I think it's a great idea if we have access to the technology that supports it. I think that probably is one thing that separates us from the larger companies, is that, we certainly have limited resources, so I'm not sure that's going to be possible. But I think you bring up a great point. When we think about private social networks, I think we have to be very judicious and very careful about how we use Facebook. And I don't know that that's the right platform for some of this. It seems to be the easiest platform to get some of this up and running on. But certainly a private social network would be a lot more secure.
Yeah, a lot of people are really upset about Facebook, and they worry about the next change that's going to conflict with your brand. It's going to conflict with your company culture. So that's a way a lot of companies are going. As we start to wrap up, is there anything you wish more people would ask you?
Well, I think you've about covered it.
Oh,
I think I
first
think you I think you got it.
first time ever. So, are you planning any new offerings?
Yes, actually, that's probably a good thing that I probably should have said. We're now offering a multi-phase sort of COVID leadership recovery program to help leaders re-engage their team as they scale back up and come back to work. So I think a lot of this is going to be helping to figure out what have we learned from this, that we need to take forward. What are some of the things that are going to eventually end? Where are we going to go back to what we knew? Where are we not? And that may be a phased approach. But I also think it's really important for organizations to assess their strategy and to figure out, of the commitments that we made, which are the ones that are realistic in this environment and which ones are not. And then once we figure that out, let's get the team aligned around how we're going to go execute those things. And that, gets into everything from capabilities that we're going to deliver to priorities to structure, investments, and things like that. So I think that product is hot right now, and we're rapidly selling that. And it's just, it's a short program. It's not a big thing. And we're trying to deliver as much of it as we can virtually, with the hope that when people come back to work and things start to calm down a little bit, we might be able to do the tail end of it in person, but we're designing it with the idea that it could be virtual, if it has to be.
Now, is that on your website so I can point my listeners to that?
Oh my goodness. It is not on our website, but we are about to build. We are in the process, and I mean, we are like a day away from an opt-in that will describe that whole program. So
Okay.
by the time this airs, I'll be able to give you a link to get it'll be a free document that'll explain how that works. And you can do it yourself, or you can call us to have some help to do that. But that whole program will be described in an opt-in that'll be available.
Okay, then what I'll do is I'll actually add that to the show notes,
Okay.
and I'll update it when you get that online.
Great. It'll be up in the next couple days, I would think.
What's the best way of following you?
You can follow us on Facebook, or you can follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn. So I'm Jennifer Eggers Speaker on Facebook and Jennifer Eggers on LinkedIn. That's probably where most of the meat of our content goes to from me personally. But we also have the LeaderShift Insights LinkedIn page as well. And there is a LeaderShift Insights and a Jennifer Eggers Speaker Facebook page as well.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. We thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was a blast. And I've really enjoyed looking at some of the other ones. So I would encourage everybody Zach has some absolutely phenomenal big name speakers on his podcast that, Mary Kelly and Norm Hull. And I mean, there's a bunch of folks that you should go check out on this podcast. So I appreciate it. It's an honor to be included.
This is your host, Zachary Alexander, Enterprise Architect at subscriptionmaker.net. Please join us next time as we continue to talk about what it takes to be a successful subscription maker.